Sabrina Salvati. Doobie-doobie-doo. Sabrina Salvati. Doobie-doobie-doo. 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 I'm your host, Sabrina Salvati. All right. Welcome to Sabby Sabs podcast. I'm your host, Sabrina Salvati. If you are new, I want to let you know that Sabby Sabs podcast is a part of Revolutionary Blackout Network. You can catch me there on Tuesdays, Thursdays, and Fridays. And you can catch me here on Mondays, Tuesdays, Thursdays, and Fridays. I have a special guest with me tonight. He's an actor, director, producer, and screenwriter. And he was also the host of Watching the Hawks on RT America. Please give a huge welcome to Tyrel Ventura. Welcome.
It is an honor and a pleasure. Thank you for having me on.
Thanks so much for coming on. I have so many questions for you. We've been talking a lot about third parties on this show. Just to give you an idea, a lot of us, or a lot of the audience members, we were like former Bernie Sanders supporters. Some of us canvassed for Bernie Sanders, donated to his campaign, and I guess I would say supporters of the squad as well. A lot of the progressives that went into Congress. And we've been heavily disappointed by what we've seen from them not pushing back, them not really fighting for the policies that they ran on, like Medicare for all, canceling student loan debt. They just seem to kind of have caved to the Democrat establishment. And I want to get your take on this. You know, Jesse Ventura is your dad. He was a third party candidate. He won as a third party candidate, not running through the two-party system. And some of the pushback that we've been getting from people, they've been telling us like, oh, well, third party candidates can't win. I want to get your take on that. And how do you think he was able to win? And why do you think some other candidates may struggle?
Well, I think third party, to start off with, I'd say that obviously third party candidates can win. It's a very uphill battle because they're taking on a two-party dictatorship. And the only time you'll ever see Democrats and Republicans publicly get along is when they're taking on a third party or trying to make those hurdles for a third party candidacy to, try to get, put those hurdles in front of them so they can't succeed in an election or even appear on the ballot, as you're seeing with some of the controversy down in North Carolina and other places. But third parties can win. Jesse was a great example of that. He raised only $300,000 when he was running for governor from all public donations, didn't take an ounce of lobbyist money or corporate money or anything like that when he was running, and was able to beat them. And they were spending millions to beat him. Now, how he was able to do that was he was allowed to debate. One of the big important things about his election, and one of the mistakes the Democrats made actually in that election, was Jesse versus at the time Norm Coleman with the Republicans and Skip Humphrey III, which up here in Minnesota land, Humphrey's the legacy name, man. Everyone knows I believe it was his father, Hubert Humphrey. So what the Democrats made a mistake on, and what Jesse was able to capitalize on, is they thought because of Jesse's especially at the time, he would lean more fiscally conservative, socially liberal, fiscally conservative. And they thought he was going to pull Republican votes. Because at the time, Norm, I think Humphrey, I think was in the lead by a little bit. Norm was coming up with about 36% and Jesse was down around 10. And so once the Democrats to the public looked like, oh, look what this great thing we're doing. We're going to let the third party into this debate, into the debate cycles for governor. What they didn't but behind the scenes, they were hoping it would pull from the Republican ticket. But what they didn't count on is that Jesse's very progressive when it comes to social issues. And when it comes to things from gay marriage to pro-choice to, LGBTQ, like Jesse's a very, very liberal person when it comes to the social issues and even on fiscal issues. Jesse's for universal health care. And so what ended up happening is once he got on camera, his views and what his belief systems ended up pulling more from the Democrats, and Humphrey fell in percent, in support. Coleman stayed about the same, fluctuated a little bit, and Jesse took all that plus the extra 10% of people they didn't count on voting, because one thing that Jesse did that was very smart of his campaign is he went to every college campus damn near in the state, because everyone said, oh, young people don't get out to vote, don't bother with them, that's not who you're trying to get. And Jesse's like, hell with that. I think young people would want to hear what Jesse Ventura has to say if he goes to their campus, and so he was able to get them out to vote at the time, and that made up enough to beat those two parties. Is it tough when you don't have the name recognition that my father had coming into? Of course, let's be honest about that. If you're Jim John Smith, Jane Smith, and without a theatrical background or a well-known background like Jesse has, it becomes a much harder race, especially as you get higher and higher up the political food chain, and the races have more notoriety to them, like your governorships or getting on that federal level, Senate, and especially president. But I think where third parties and where they have made an inroads, which I think is very important for us not to forget, is third parties can win on a very local level. Yep. Third parties can get on city council. They can become mayors. They can become county commissioners. They can become, attorney general, things like county attorneys and city attorneys, things like that. And so I think that it's very easy to get seduced by national politics and that American Idol bandstand of it all. But I think where you want to see real change that's going to affect you directly is start voting third party in your local elections. Because then you get a groundswell of candidates, and who knows, out of that groundswell of people winning seats, you might suddenly find that next great candidate, that next great person who has got that charisma and got that belief system that can speak to a lot of different people across a lot of different demographics. I mean, that's the other kind of thing that we also have to remember with third parties and when picking candidates is, look, not every candidate's going to align with you 100% of the time. Right. There's always going to be a little bit that I'm not too hot on that part. But you as a voter and you as a decision maker in this country have to decide, okay, well, how much is too far? Where do they cross the line where I can't support that person? And so you got to, no one's ever going to be perfect. But you got to look for those candidates who their heart's in the right place. What they're trying to do is in the right place. So even if you might disagree with them on a few issues, if they're there to represent you to the best of their ability, honestly, without taking corporate money and without falling and they have the strength of character not to be seduced by the system, then get behind that person, because any kind of change at this point is better than what we have.
That's right. That's right. One of the things I want to ask you about, I feel like there are a lot of people that are frustrated with Joe Biden's job right now. He's just tanking in the polls. People are leaving the Democratic Party, and I don't blame them. I actually think 2024 would be a great time for someone to run as a third party or independent candidate for president, because I feel like I just saw a poll recently. The majority of Americans want a third party. So people are starting to, I think, wake up and leave this duopoly that we have. Do you think that 2024 would be a good time for someone to run third party or independent for president of the United States? Or do you think that people will look at them as a spoiler candidate?
It depends ultimately on who the Dems and Repubs decide to run. But let's be honest, first, there's no such thing as a spoiler candidate if people are voting their heart and conscience. Number one, you got to get this idea out of your head, I've tried to do it, because we all lean towards, well, I'd rather vote for the winner. If they're close enough to like what I believe in, and I've got to vote for the winner. You got to get that out of your head and say, look, the only thing that you can do, the most important thing that you can do as a citizen when you vote is vote your heart and conscience. Vote for the person that you want to see be your lead. Be your representative in whatever capacity, because then at least you can look yourself in the mirror the following morning and say, hey, look, I voted my heart and conscience regardless of how this race turned out. The spoiler thing is that kind of bullshit. Pardon me, I don't know if swearing's okay, but it's the garbage that they put out to try to not get you to vote third party, or to try not get you to vote for candidates who don't play ball with the system, with the mainstream party systems that they're going. So and also let's also talk, it'd be nice to see some ranked choice voting. It'd be nice to see some different styles of voting in elected officials, so it doesn't become just this horse race of then you get rid of that idea of like, well, I better vote for the winner because I don't want to be on the losing side, or I might get admonished at the office the next day, or my peer group might yell at me because I voted for Jill Stein in 2016. Oh no, like it's at the end of the day, you vote your heart and conscience. And do I think that the 2024 is shaping up to be that? I think if you get Biden versus Trump 2, yeah, I think the country's more than ready, because nobody wants those two choices at this point. Nobody really wanted Biden, I don't think, ultimately. I mean, except for the power brokers in Washington, but ultimately as a country, I think that we looked around and said, look, Trump is dangerous enough as it is. He's too much of a loose cannon. We can't trust what this guy's going to do. He's a total narcissistic monster who's definitely pushing the gas pedal down towards his version of fascism. There's a lot of different versions of fascism, but for that kind of narcissistic soul leader thing, that he had that locked up.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that you had a lot of people come out to vote and said, look, I don't like voting for Joe Biden, but I have to vote against Donald Trump. I think if you see that replay, and no one's shocked that Biden's been so far an abject failure on these issues. He's actually pretty consistent with who he was before he ran. He just sold a lot of hearts and flowers on the campaign train to try to get those Bernie voters and try to get those independent voters out there saying, hey, come on board. So I'm not shocked that Biden's not following through. Plus, I don't want to sound ageist, but at the end of the day, we have to start doing better than two candidates who are over 70. And even, people want my father to run and things like that. Great. But even my dad will tell you, is this the best we can do? Everyone's over 70. And I looked at a piece on Congress the other day that like some of the biggest leaders in Congress are all in their 80s.
Yep.
Look, I love my grandparents. I love that generation. But at the end of the day, with what's going on in the world today, we need younger leaders. And I think it's about time that we had a younger president. And we have people who actually understand technology. I mean, look, like I said, I don't want to sound ageist, but there's a certain point where you're looking at going like, does he know how to use an iPad? Like I have a hard enough time with like my uncle and people like that who are in their 70s trying to get them to figure out technology. And now you're going to ask them to make decisions on this? It's absolutely ridiculous. Now, it doesn't mean that you don't have a wise old person in the room who can, point you in the right direction. It doesn't mean you can't get really good advice and things like that. But we definitely need a bigger youth movement in politics today, because there's far too many millionaires and far too many over 80 millionaires. I think if you have to retire from your federal government job at 65, then why the hell do we got leaders who are pushing 90?
Oh, that's a good question. I never thought about that. I want to get your opinion about someone like a Bernie Sanders. Do you feel that Bernie Sanders was genuine when he went out, tried to get a lot of younger people to come out and vote and fight for a movement and have a revolution? My response to that is I feel like in the end he wasn't, because he walked away from his movement and told us to vote for Joe Biden. But what's your take on someone like a Bernie Sanders?
I think I believe that Bernie Sanders is a man of conviction. I think that Bernie believed in I don't think he's lying about his belief systems. I don't think he was just out there to kind of like win a popularity contest. I think he really wanted to run, but I think also Bernie is still, despite the I next to his name, I think he's still at the end of the day a Democratic Party loyalist. And I think that he will still do what's best for the party, for good or bad. He'll fight against the party, and I think Bernie Sanders is a very important voice. I will not take, just because Bernie ended up, endorsing Clinton or endorsing Biden, you still can't take away from what Bernie was able to create. And I want to say that he did that honestly. I'm sure people will disagree with me and things like that, which they're entitled to. Look, we all have to have our own opinions and things like that. But I didn't get a vibe from Bernie that he was like a snake oil salesman on the campaign trail, like rallying up all the young progressives out there just to feed him into the buzzsaw factory that was Hillary Clinton and Joe Biden. But I knew that because my father, when Bernie held a rally here in Minnesota, my father went down to the rally. This is when it was Hillary in 2016. When Bernie first hit the scene and was starting to really amass this huge following. My dad went down with the overall intent to endorse him. and give him his endorsement, which had been a huge endorsement for to get an independent third party icon like my father. Pardon me for saying icon. I don't mean to sound not humble when I say that. But he's kind of is that in many circles. And Bernie barely gave him the time of day, and then my dad asked him the all important question. And I want to say this was back, this was early in the primaries. I think in December, January, if I'm not mistaken. And my dad asked him a very important question. He said, Bernie, if you lose the primary because you're an independent, will you take your following and then run for president as an independent? Will you then, if you don't win this, will you then go against Clinton and Trump? And Bernie looked him in the eye and said, oh, no, absolutely not. So very early on in that race, Bernie knew that whether win or lose, he was going to support the Democrats. I think you can he can be criticized for that. He's a politician, everyone, but do I think he was a snake oil salesman just trying to rally up the youngsters? No, I think Bernie does actually believe in what he believes in and was hoping to get the nomination. I think ultimately Bernie is who he is. He's a nice guy. Maybe too nice, I don't know, and didn't have that fight in him to say, no, we're going to take this to a whole nother level and I'm going to run as an independent now.
We've been talking a lot about censorship on the show the past couple of months. I have seen people become deplatformed on, whether it's on YouTube. Obviously, you worked with RT. You guys experienced that there as well. Recently, we've seen this happen more so with voices that are anti-war or speak out against imperialism. Just happened recently to Jackson Hinkle. So I'm curious about your time at RT America, because I really liked RT America because I liked the voices that were on there and I felt like I was getting something different, something different there. What was your time like at RT, and what was it like when it was announced that they were going to shut it down?
Well, my time at RT for what I was doing, performing on a show and bringing people, trying to make people think, bringing people news that me and Tabitha and my later co-host Amisha, that we were, we and our producers and what we felt people needed to hear. That part of it was fantastic. I had total journalistic control over what went on the show at the end of the day. I never ran into a problem with them saying, no, you can't air this because the Kremlin doesn't like it or anything like that. I never ran into any kind of censorship in that aspect. I mean, the times that a story might would get shit canned or wouldn't be able to do, generally it was always because like every other show on the network was doing that and they just wanted a little bit of variety. Rather than the same topic over and over. I mean, unless obviously it's some kind of major breaking story, you don't want 5 shows in a row. Unlike CNN, MSNBC, and Fox, you don't want 5 shows in a row just talking about the same stuff.
Right.
So now and then, you lose a story that way. But I never ran into any major amounts of censorship. Now, outside of that, it was difficult. Not only are you working, I didn't start the job amidst all the heat that they were getting. That kind of happened after I started there, and so it was a fascinating time and place to experience, where you suddenly had the CIA doing reports talking about content and having third-party debates is somehow damaging to the to the American election system and like all of that, which I was like, wow, really? Talking about Occupy or talking about the pipeline protests, that somehow that's a danger to American society because it's on a Russian, network. That was a very interesting time and place to live in. And it was an interesting experience there. It was a hard place to work because, there was a lot of behind the scenes stuff that just had to do with just dealing with, it always felt like you're working at a startup. I had the complications and things like that. But ultimately the 30 minutes that I was able to do Hawks every day, that was a brilliant moment in time. Was I sad when I saw YouTube take that down and DirecTV and things like that? Of course I was. I wasn't so much sad. I mean, I think at the end of the day, we did something like 1,600 episodes of that show. What made me sad wasn't the loss of my work. What made me sad is that myself and Tabitha Wallace and Amisha Cross and our producers we gave a lot of people a platform and a lot of stories a platform that didn't normally get a massive audience and didn't normally get viewing. And so there was a lot of people that had never been able to reach people before with their story or with their activism or things they were fighting for, who now don't have that to like point to. You know, now they can't go back and say, oh, look at this great interview that I did about this thing that I'm so passionate, I'm so fighting for, on, you know, multitude of different conversations that were happening long before they hit the mainstream. I mean, we were talking about LGBTQ rights on that show and you know, deaths of trans folks a long time before that became the hot button issue that it became. And we were giving platforms to people who are fighting, who, like I said, don't normally get you know, 10, 15 minutes of airtime on primetime television around the world. And we tried to bring those voices to the forefront. And so them not being able to look back at their content and being able to access it, I think is sad because, you know, I was speaking out against the Ukraine invasion as it happened on RT. Now, I think Chris Hedges and a few of us brought up after it closed down. You know, myself, my father was also speaking out against it. Hedges was speaking out against it. I think the three of us, you know, looking back, would we have been allowed to stay on RT? I don't know, because, you know, Russia and Putin did a very hard about face and I think kind of decided to play the America role that we played in Iraq. Now, that's not, obviously, we did a lot to push them into a corner to do that. But I don't agree with invasion. If I'm against one invasion, I have to be against all invasion, just whether or not they were cutting me, you know, whether or not I was getting money from Russia as a salary. I will never support war. No, you know, I just can't. I will never do that. And so would we have been taken off the air in another week or so had they stayed on? I don't know, maybe. But I think that with every ending, there's a new beginning. And I think that the RT had run its course at that point. You know, the direction the channel was heading in my perspective, I didn't particularly care for some of the other commentators they were bringing on and some of the other kind of shows that they were trying to build. It's not my call. But, you know, I don't, you know, where it was going anyway, I don't know if it had ever been the same as it was when I was there, you know, in that time frame.
What do you see for the future of independent media, more so political independent media? And I asked that question because I know obviously you've worked on films before. One of the things that I believe this was tried before, it might have been TYT who tried this. They were trying to see if they could somehow get onto like these cable like networks. Obviously, some of the things that we talk about might not be allowed. I'm just keeping it real. And I think that's the problem that a lot of us run into, is that there's a reason why you don't see us on channels like CNN or MSNBC. They would never bring us on to have the talking points that we have. But what do you see for the future of political independent media, given the fact that there's new platforms now, there's like Rockfin, there's Rumble, and then also at the same time, there's a lot of censorship that's going on as well?
Well, yeah, no, without a doubt. I think that it's a weird time to be an independent political media because on one hand, I think it's the most powerful it's ever been, without a doubt. You have more voices, I think, speaking out online than you've ever had before. At the same time, yes, you're seeing a lot of pushback against that. You're seeing a lot of, like you mentioned, the deplatforming, the shadow banning and things of that nature. You're seeing that, and that you have to expect. That's going to happen. You know, it wasn't like that. If you're fighting with truth to power, power's going to push back. And I remember a lot of people, with Twitter and things like that. And one of the things I want to remind people of is, look, these platforms, they only have power because you give them power. If you believe that because Twitter censored you or took you down, that now you don't have a voice, that's because you're giving Twitter that power over you. And I think we forget that because, look, it's easy to use these things. It's easy to jump online and just pop on, I got Twitter, I got my YouTube site, I got this, and then when those don't work out, oh my God, it's the end of the world. What will I ever do? I'm not making light of that in terms of the ugliness of that kind of action towards, especially when you're talking about First Amendment and free speech. However, we have to get out of this mentality that we give them so much power that they can control our free speech, and that's us giving that to them. there's a lot of different outlets today that you can find your voice on, that you can get up and speak your mind on, and you can find good journalism, and you can find good political commentators who are out there giving you the truth. You, as a news consumer, have to find that and take a little bit of extra effort to do that. And as a news deliverer, as someone who's bringing that to you, you gotta spread out. You can't just be dedicated to one platform, because you never know. If that platform could crash because they run out of money, that platform could take you off because they don't like you. I mean, that's the nature of the game when you're doing this. So I think it's on both sides to make sure that they're constantly in that fight. And it's a fight. You always got to fight to get your voice heard. That's always been the case. Now, I think more than ever, we have more avenues to do that. So we should, on one hand, be thankful. We're at a weird time in history where everybody can be heard. That's never happened before. So part of this is that growing pain. But I think that, like, as we celebrate that ability, we also have to be steadfast defenders of that ability and stop giving power to other people and saying that, oh my God, Twitter took me down, so now my free speech is censored. Keep fighting. Find another platform. If you're speaking, like I said, it's not to take away from the ugliness of that action, but at the same time, don't give up the fight.
That's a good point. Speaking of not giving up the fight, I was talking to Chris Hedges recently about organizing and activism and some of the problems that some of us have been running into. When the pandemic hit, some of us had no choice but to kind of shift that to online activism. I hate to call it that, but that's kind of where we went, because my state, Massachusetts, we were shut completely down. So we couldn't meet in person for these discussions anymore. So we switched to like these online community groups, whether it's Twitter, whether it's Facebook, etc. What I kind of found was that you end up with more infiltrators. You don't know everybody that's in these groups, and it's harder to actually get more people to come out to these events. It was actually easier to get more people to come out to these events when we actually met and had these discussions in person, and we went and talked to people in person and said, yes, come to this event. But now when we advertise these things online, especially Twitter's the worst with it, there are so many naysayers. The turnout is not as good. For example, there's a March for Medicare for All that's coming up the end of this month in DC. Some people don't even know about it. We did this march last year in over 50 cities in this country, and I feel like less people seem to know about it now than they did, last year. I'm like, this is the second time around. Like, you guys should know about this information. And I want to hear from you in reference to just like being on the ground and like actually speaking with the people, because I feel like that's something that, like, your father, I feel like he was really good at that. Like, he knew how to talk to the people.
Yeah, you have to have that physical interaction, because look, like you say, online is this age's new version of a bullhorn. So yeah, you're going to reach a lot of people and all that. But like you said, it's easy to be a keyboard warrior.
Yeah.
It's easy to sit behind this screen and type away and, hell yeah, I'm for that. Let's do that. It's a whole different aspect when you take it to the streets. Or at least, take it outside of that and see who's willing to show up at a meeting spot, who's willing to show up at a protest, who's willing to actually, follow through with what they preach online. So we cannot lose that. No, we can't. I mean, we can't lose that, because that's really what galvanizes people. I mean, you go back to 2016 and everybody's kind of, how did Trump win, and all shocked and all that kind of thing. Well, he was pulling numbers and he was making his speeches entertaining. I saw a lot of parallels that way with my father. When he would go to speak, you'd see massive crowds there. So you always have to have a physical presence in protest. You got to do it. To me, the right kind of, and look, by no means am I an expert. There are a lot of other people who are brilliant activists and brilliant organizers and know, and really have the pulse of how to change things far beyond me. My job is just to give them a platform as best I can so they can be heard. That's what I did. That's what I tried to do. But I think that the important thing is that, yeah, you have to have that voice in the streets, because the only way that, it's easy to ignore it if it's just online, but there's also been some really brilliant ways of boycotting and getting activism to work online as well. And so I think that at the end of the day, though, no, you have to have that physical presence in the streets, and you have to have that because that's how you build community bond is being physically with someone and showing that, and getting out there and proving that you're going to show up and not just be a keyboard general.
Agreed. I want to get your take on general strike. Last year, or it was the year before, no, it was last year, there was supposed to be a general strike in October. Now, there were questions about whether or not this was even real. We talked about it on this show, and there was a lot of buzz around it, and people got hyped up. We did like a general strike kind of education summit over at RBN. And some people were really frustrated, mad at us they're like, how dare you talk about having a general strike? And we're like, we have to educate people somehow. I mean, you need to know what are you fighting for and how would this work? And I want to get your opinion about that, because sometimes I feel like it's gotten to that point in this country where like maybe we just need to shut things down.
Yes. Yes. No, unequivocally, yes. Like, yeah, I think general strikes are awesome. I think that the more, look, people forget, I think, especially in the mainstream, they generally forget that the point of a protest is to disrupt. The point of a protest is to be heard. I remember seeing all these people getting angry at Black Lives Matter when they would like protest on a highway and shut down a highway or a busy intersection. Things like, it's supposed to shake you up a little bit, within the lines. Obviously if I'm against war, I'm against violence in all its forms. So I will never get behind violent revolution, or not. I won't get behind violent protest. However, the more disruption you can cause to shake people out of their apathy, the better. And so general strikes are perfect ways to do that. I mean, look, if you think about it, what happens if one day all of FedEx and all of Amazon, if all them workers decided just one day, even 2 days, 3 days, to say, we're not going to ship anything today. All us grunts in the field carrying this around, we're not going to do that today. You would shut the economy of this country down. If all the people in the ports decided, what, we're not going to let anything into the ports. Us workers who have to take this off of the ships, we're not going to do that today. That shuts the economy down, and then that sends that message that we need to be heard. Because remember, at the end of the day, the American people still outnumber the leadership.
That's right.
Yeah, and it's easy to forget that. But I think that the one thing that the pandemic kind of weirdly taught us in a way that it was one of the good things to come out of it was that it showed you how easily the system can be brought to a halt and how much power that you actually do have if you don't go to work. Or if you say, what, I'm staying home today because of X, Y, and Z, this belief system, I want to see this change. And so I think, look, these are brilliant tools that have worked throughout human history. General strike is not a new thing. That's been going on for a long time. We've just kind of forgotten about it in a lot of sectors. And I would love to see massive protests like that come back, because I think that you not only have to have, but then after the protest still comes more work. It isn't about just showing up and carrying a sign either. It takes work. I mean, this is something that if you can move the federal government an inch, if you can move a government just an inch, sometimes that's a huge win. And with every huge win or with every ignominious defeat, you still have to keep pushing forward and fighting.
That's a good point. I'm very happy to hear that about like general strike, because that's kind of like our thing over at RBN. I want to ask, what was it like for you growing up, knowing that your dad was Jesse Ventura? And I asked that because when I was a kid, I remember, like, I don't watch wrestling anymore, but when I was a kid, that was kind of a big thing, like for me and my friends. And I remember seeing all these guys. I remember seeing Jesse Ventura and Hulk Hogan and Jake the Snake and all of them. And I couldn't imagine what it must have been like growing up with your dad being Jesse Ventura.
It was, well, it's funny. When you're in it and growing up, you don't know any different because that's just your dad, and my dad did something that nobody else's dads on the street did, or moms, and so there was always a lot of light on the family. You have a lot of different varieties of memories that come from that. I remember being a little kid and hearing 12,000 people in an arena yelling, "My dad sucks," which is weird to hear when you're like 6 years old. Like, why don't they like my dad? At the same time, I think it my dad has always he's always been his own person. He's always stuck by his beliefs and being an individual. And if anything, what that taught me was that you can truly accomplish whatever you choose to set out to accomplish. That doesn't mean it's easy. It's not, I'm not talking about sappy, like, oh, you can win no matter what. No, there's a lot stacked against you, but you can maintain your individuality and you can maintain who you are no matter what life throws at you. Even if you don't win at certain things, you can still maintain your character. And that's one thing that my dad's done. And my dad's had a lot of losses for all of the great Renaissance aspects of his life, from Navy SEALs to wrestling to acting to all that. During all that, he's still taken a lot of L's that you don't hear about. You only hear about the wins. And it's having the strength of character to get through those times. That's what my dad really taught me. And he also taught me to be an individual and to also question. Don't be afraid to raise your hand and ask a question. Don't be afraid to question your government. Don't be afraid to stand up for what you believe in, even if you're in the minority. Even if, let's say it's, I think we oftentimes forget, especially in today's day and age, that the freedom of speech isn't there to protect popular speech. Popular speech doesn't need protection. It's there to protect unpopular speech, because at one point, some of the greatest things that we hold dear to us today, that we're fighting against, that was unpopular at one time. It was more popular to be a racist in this country at one point in time. And to be a non-racist was considered ugly, and you had to shun that, at one point in history, and so, you have to stand up for your convictions. And that's what it was like growing up in my dad's house. The one great thing too about growing up with my dad is he never tried to direct me to go in any situation. He always, whatever I found interest in, whatever I found fascinating as a person, he always supported. He never tried to push me to follow in his footsteps or to be a copy of him. He pushed me to be an individual and to embrace my individuality. And also he taught me very much to, and I know somebody keeps saying I'm sappy, which is all right. I'll take sappy. I see the comments too. He also tried to push me to also care and love everybody around me. If you remember my show, at the end of each show, after talking, 28 minutes of tragedy and anger and frustration and all of that, I always tried to end the show by saying one simple thing, is that in this world, we're not loved enough. And so I tell you all I love you. And I really mean that, because to me, that's one of the most important things that is very easy to miss. We can get so caught up in our anger about what we're facing that we forget that at the end of the day, why are we trying to make this change? We're trying to make this change to make the world a better place. We're trying to make this change because we do love our fellow citizens. We do love our neighbors. We do love our community. We do love the country. And that's why we're trying to change it. But it's easy to kind of become cynical. Even as an activist fighting for change, I met a lot of cynical activists that break my heart, because I know that they started from a place of love. I want to see the world be better. And then that fight to change hardens them and makes them even more cynical. And that's dangerous. You can't lose that love.
I agree. I've actually met some activists. It was at the Earth Day rally. And there was one woman, she came up to me and she told me, she said, I've been protesting for 60 years. She said, it just makes you kind of want to give up hope sometimes. But there was something that we brought up at that particular rally about the media. And she said, looking back on it, she said, I've done all these protests, but I never had a protest where we were protesting against the media. And she said, I think you guys are bringing up a good point that we should be protesting outside CNN, MSNBC, Fox News. She said, we should be holding them accountable because they're the ones that control the narrative.
Exactly. Oh, without a doubt. And the greatest way that you can protest media is with your pocketbook. Honestly, I love when I see people protesting outside of CNN and Fox and all that. That's brilliant, because that makes them feel real uncomfortable. But also the biggest way that you can protest against them is also with your pocketbook. Stop watching. And thankfully, most people have. I mean, when you really look at cable news numbers and the ratings that they pull, ain't nobody watching. you know, ain't nobody of significance really watching. I mean, when you talk about the width of people watching entertainment in today's, which I call it entertainment because that's ultimately what it is. You know, a long time ago, cable companies realized how much money ESPN was making and said, hey, let's take the technique that ESPN uses and then let's duplicate that on our show where we have two people just yell at each other because each one hates the other person's home team. You know, when they look around and say, why is the country divided? Well, that'd be a good reason right there, because you've taken away the ability to have honest dialogue and honest discussion and honest disagreement and turn it into my team is better than your team. And if you don't like my team, I hate your guts. And that's where a lot of that tribalism comes from. And then that's where you have then a lot of crusading politicians who only want to get elected every year and don't really give a shit about the job they're doing. They just want the comfiness of the job. And then that big ass payoff when they finally can leave and go through that revolving door and get a, you know, a 7-figure job in corporate America. You know, they thrive on that because they know if all they got to do is just badmouth the opposing team and not really enact any change and just tell you to vote harder. You know, that's great because then that keeps you tribalized and that keeps you at each other's throats rather than going after, you know, the true power of the country.
Well said. Now, I know you worked on Mystic River. I have to say that was probably one of the best, as someone who's here in the Boston area, that's probably one of the best Boston-based movies I've seen because you guys actually got the Boston accent down, which is not easy to do. I've seen multiple people try to do this and it just doesn't come across. I'm like, it sounds forced. It's not an easy accent for actors to try to like take on. But I have to say that movie in particular, I think it really resonated with the fact that aside from the main plot of that story, one of the things that I pointed out to people is like, you notice that Tim Robbins' character talked about gentrification. He mentioned that, you know, the professionals were moving in and people were moving out. And that's a piece that people can miss if they're not paying attention. But I told people, I said, if you look back at that timeline, that makes sense because that's actually when it started here. And it's been getting worse ever since.
Mm-hmm. Oh, Mystic River was an incredible movie to be a part of making. I worked as Sean Penn's assistant on that. I'd worked for Penn for about 4 years, after I graduated high school, and it was an incredible film to make because you had so many beautiful actors in it, each coming from a very specific ideology and back. I mean, you had Tim Robbins and Sean Penn, two very, you know, left-wing activist actors, right? Working for, you know, under the direction of Clint Eastwood, who's obviously very conservative. But yet I got to watch them sit down and talk about, you know, offset. I got to watch them sit down and talk about political issues and actually watch people get along and have really good dialogue back and forth. And at the end of the day, I think it made for a really interesting film. And there was a lot of really, really talented craft people. You know, there's a lot of really talented artists on that set. And one thing interesting about working with Clint Eastwood is that he doesn't do a lot of takes. You know, some directors might do 8, 9, 10 takes, 12 takes, and you know, I'm sitting here watching, and Clint maybe do 2 or 3, maybe 4 if you're lucky. And so a lot of the actors kind of had to shift how they approached what they would do as actors to fit their performance within those takes. Now, obviously, if they came to Clint and say, hey, could we have another take? He'd give it to them, you know, out of respect. But they kind of liked seeing how Clint's vibe was because he would shoot so quickly and he would, you know, and it was amazing how professional and how well acted and what a great story written by Dennis Lehane. That Mystic River story was, which I believe Dennis is a local Massachusetts. I think he's a local guy up there, and he really captured. And you know, there are unsung heroes like the actor Kevin Chapman, who was from Boston area, who, you know, helped Sean with the accent and knew those neighborhoods front to back, and was able to try to capture that. And look, you know, film. I love film. That's what I started off trying to do with my life, was to be a filmmaker. And then as life would have it, I end up being more into the political commentary side of things. To me, telling a fictional story and then delivering the news, it's different, but it's the same, because I think at the end of the day, I'm a storyteller. But you know, films are powerful. We need art as much as we need, art and culture have to go along with the activism, because a lot of times you can reach and change more people's minds through books and film than you'll ever going to get with a bullhorn on the street. You know, you can shift a culture towards a certain direction if you can reach them through their entertainment. You know, and look, the other side does it too. The CIA has a long history of influencing Hollywood films. You know, and so that's why it's so vital that you embrace the artists through film, music, literature. You have to embrace them a part of any movement for change, because they're the people that are going to actually probably reach more people faster than you could ever dream by just doing a march. You know, and you know, now I'm not downplaying the marches, but you know, I'm saying, or the great articles and the great editorials and the flyers and the independent newspaper and independent media, all of that is vitally important. But you can't forget your artists, your musicians, your painters, your writers, your films, you know, because those also will change society for the better if done right, and they will reach a lot of people and give it, films and things like that will give it more of a human face for what you're trying to change. Because you can tell people policy all day long that makes sense on paper, but if they don't see it in action in some capacity, or if they don't know who they're fighting for, whether through documentary films even or things like that, it's harder to reach people, harder to change their minds.
Agreed. Being from Minnesota, I've never been to Minnesota. I know 3 things about Minnesota, and that's Prince, Jesse Ventura, and the Mall of America. I'll be honest with you. But as someone who's from Minnesota, what's something about Minnesota, or in particular Minneapolis, that you feel most people don't know, but they should know, other than this is where Prince came from? And I have a question about that too. Like, what was it like for people, you know, growing up during that time with someone like Prince being from that area? Because I wasn't sure if he still stayed there or not. But I heard,
Prince still, I mean, he had places all over the place at a certain point, but Prince was still had a very big scene here. And, you know, that music revolution that he brought, you know, it's interesting because we also can claim Bob Dylan too. You know, Bob Dylan, I think, got his early start in Minnesota, you know, he's from the area in North Dakota, I believe, ultimately far, I believe. You know, Prince is you know, a legend. At the end of the day, especially musically, and you know, Prince also was one of those people who fought against the label and fought against the system in order to retain the rights to all of his music, and he really helped kickstart that trend of artists really speaking up for themselves and not being victim to the corporate control of the record labels. And Prince was kind of one of the really major forces of that. Him and Tom Petty also was a big voice against that as well, of like really maintaining artistic control as an individual and not giving your name and likeness away for them to commodify. You know, Minnesota's interesting. It's I think a lot came out about the reality of Minnesota with the murder of George Floyd. You know, growing up here, you know, Minnesota has a very kind of, it can be a very kind of diabolical form of racism that you come across up here. You know, it's not the only thing about the state, don't get me wrong, but you know, it's one of those things where it's like everybody's nice to each other's faces, but the moment someone leaves the room, then they start talking. You know, and so you get that a lot. I don't know if it's particular to Minnesota, but it's also, but you know, in other places as well. At the same time, there is definitely a sense of community up here, and for all of the negative that, you know, you can see, there is also still a very strong, passionate belief in the community and belief in the state. People in Minnesota are proud to be from Minnesota, you know, you know, and they don't like it when Minnesota is portrayed badly, and they will stand up and try to change things. You know, I give a lot of love and a lot of credit to those activists during the George Floyd, during that tragedy, because man, they truly, you know, fought back and actually, you know, changed the way certain things work. Not as much as we'd like, but the fact that they were able to get a conviction on Chauvin was blew my mind. You know, and you know, that came from the voice of the people influencing the attorney general to fight hard on that and bring a good case, not just bring a case that they know going to get thrown out, but they're just doing it because they're under pressure, but actually fight to really bring a case and try a good case. You know, I think that I love, I haven't lived here in 20 years. I just moved back last summer. And so Minnesota's still a little new to me. I'm kind of grappling with the fact that it ain't the same Minnesota I left in terms of just how things look and where all the good restaurants and where everybody hangs out and things like that as change is. But it's a beautiful state. It's a very noble state and its people. But there's a lot of growing it has to do. And there's a lot of embedded things that need to change in this state to make it better. And part of me saying that too is I've tried to, through my dad and me, have a Substack page called Die First Then Quit, Jesse Ventura's Die First Then Quit, where we're kind of funneling all of our political commentary and our activism and things like that. And so one of the things I started doing there is doing a podcast called Independent Streak. And on the podcast, I'm trying to highlight politicians, influencers, activists, musicians, people who are, really trying to really have that independent spirit and who are fighting for change. And I was able to, focus on two candidates up here who are running for election in Hulda Hiltsley, who's running for Minnesota State Senate Senate locally for the state, and another cat named Bull Johnson. I was able to interview both of them. And while, Hulda's running, as a Democrat, her mindset is one of change and really trying to represent her community and everybody in that community and not fall victim to the trappings of the Democratic Party, and is trying to fix that and try to fight back against that. Bull Johnson is a guy who definitely is a libertarian, but his head's in the right place. He doesn't want to say my way or the highway. He realizes in his district, he represents everybody, including people that don't share the same political belief systems as him. And he's man enough to step up and say, no, I'm here to accommodate everybody I represent, not just my political viewpoint. I run as this so you know what my belief systems are, but that doesn't mean I'm going to turn my back on progressives in my district. That doesn't mean I'm going to turn my back on these things. So, they're all people, and they're willing to work. They want to work. They want to find those ways to satisfy not only their base, but also, folks who disagree with them, and try to make them understand where they're coming from and try to find that. And I want, I got to give, so I try to get a showcase to folks like that who are out there fighting, who are out there running and putting themselves on the line and trying to make this country better.
Awesome. And I have the Substack shared here. I'll just go to the homepage really quick. Jesse Ventura's Die First Then Quit. This is awesome. And is this for the podcast? Is it audio only or audio video?
We do audio only on the podcast. We do video as well. The one great thing, and the reason I love coming to Substack and publishing out of Substack, is that it not only can you do the written articles, but that you can also do video, and you can also do podcast audio and video too. It's kind of a great platform to hit all three things. And, and they have I think the people who founded Substack and created it are very much free speech first. They want to get a variety of voices on there. So everybody can have, everybody can be heard. And I love it. Obviously I have a bad taste in my mouth when it comes to places like YouTube and things like that. So I don't trust certain places anymore, and I won't make the same mistake twice. But no, so I've really loved enjoying Substack because of the challenges, or because of the artistic challenge of it, I can write, I can do video, I can hit people on three different waves of media. And that's a lot of fun.
That's right. And I noticed there's one on here called Ventura Yang 2024. Did you hear Andrew Yang announced this earlier today, that if Joe Biden runs in 2024 and it's Trump, then he's going to run as either independent or third party candidate? Did you hear about that?
I just now from you, but I know that Andrew was definitely like he's pushing third party hard. Him and my father had a great conversation about it. I don't know yet if Andrew Yang's the guy. I have to see more of his politics to see where he's at. But I do get a feeling that at the very least, he's trying to create another option. He's trying to get more voices at the table. Like I say, I don't know enough about Andrew's politics to say I'm gonna get behind him. I gotta see a lot more yet still, in my opinion. but I do applaud his effort right now to try to build a real third party. And maybe he's the guy to help do that. I don't know. I know he wants to have a big tent and allow a lot of people under the tent and a lot of different political ideologies under the tent. That's going to be like herding cats. But maybe enough people are just sick of it. They say, you know what, to hell with it. Even if I'm a libertarian standing next to a progressive, we want to change the system. And maybe that's where you'll see that. I don't know. I don't know if that's even a good partnership. But I think that if you're going to see the rise of a third party and really have it take root, I think you're going to have to see it along the lines of what I saw when I was visiting. I remember during Occupy Wall Street. The interesting thing about Occupy Wall Street when I was there was that you saw a lot of different political ideologies all fighting for the same thing. They were all fighting against Wall Street, and they all both saw the danger of unchecked Wall Street control over government and over our economy and over all of that. And I think it's going to be. So that a lot of people with different political ideologies can actually get together and fight against the same thing. And I think we could use a little bit more of that. Doesn't mean that you have to buy in, to somebody who's different than you politically. But if you're all fighting the same thing, at least for the time being, rally together, and maybe you win them over to your side. You never know. I will say I have gotten many a libertarian to move progressive in my lifetime and talking to them, as wild as that sounds. And it seems impossible, but I've been able to do it.
Awesome. Tyrel, thank you so much for coming on. I really do appreciate it. But before you go, where else can people find you besides the Substack?
That's where they can find me. I'm also, I also have my Facebook page, and I also am on Twitter. Thank God I don't have a blue check mark. I will refuse to get a blue check mark. But I'm also on Twitter. But no, that's where you can find everything that me and Jesse are doing right now. And that's been one of the great gifts, is that I've been able to move back home and work alongside my father. He's 71 last Friday. So it's been a true gift being able to work with my dad, and I will definitely speak to him, and we'll hopefully get him on your show.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Take care.
Thank you.
All right, guys. Got a couple more things I want to talk about tonight. I do want to go ahead and give shout outs to people in the chat. I do have a couple of starred ones here. Give me just a second. Battleborn Socialist says, I think you mean man, I miss watching the Hawks. Great to see Tyrel Ventura. Great guest, Sabs. Thank you so much. Mr. X says, bring back Ross Perot from the dead. He was the closet independent in 1992. The closest independent in 1992 to win the nomination. Yes, I think Ross Perot got 20% of the vote, you guys. This is really a lot if you think about it. Thank you for the super chat, AJF. Ventura symbolizes a very important lesson for the left to gain political ground talk about interest in values, interest, not values. Say worker/laborer, not proletariat. Politically, values are rhetorical. Talk typically. Thank you so much for that. And thank you for this super chat as well. Even if we lose, use the campaign funds raised to in turn redirect it to mutual aid efforts. Yes, this is something that Case Study QB was talking about. It's sort of raising money through electioneering, but spending with people's money on common interest. Bam. And thank you for the super chat as well. Doing what I said before is to undermine the Dems on purpose. That's the way the left can be militant and a threat to Dems, forcing them to change. Maybe. LOL. Thank you for that as well. Chris Legion's in the house. Prince said he liked Minnesota because the cold kept bad people away. That sounds like something that Prince would say. Definitely check out that Substack, guys. I think I pinned it. If I didn't pin it, I'll pin it. Check out the Substack. The link is there for Jesse Ventura and for Tyrel Ventura. And I want to go ahead and give a quick shout out to people who are Sabby patrons. So welcome, one and all. I'm in a great mood today, you guys. I had a pretty cool weekend. Thank you to everyone who is a Sabby patron. I have 5 categories for those of you who are interested. I have members, Sabby, Sabinators, Sabsters, Ultimate. All of their names are listed here. They're doing the damn thing. Thank you guys so much for your support. I really do appreciate that. And their names are also scrolling across the bottom of the screen. Boop, boop. All right, guys, what are we talking about tonight? Now, I want to go ahead and share my thumbnail here. Just a second. Okay, tonight we're discussing Aaron Mate and Max Blumenthal push back. That is going to be a good discussion. I don't know if you guys were aware of this this conference that they went to recently. It's now available on their channel on the Gray Zone. So I do want to talk about that because there's some things mentioned in that discussion that I think is important. I'm also going to discuss Richard Wolff recent class shift. So you guys know Richard Wolff, I've been going to him a lot for economic updates. This is a discussion that he's had with RJ Esco. He's met with him before, but he's going to talk about where we were in the 1970s compared to where we are today. And I have some statistics I want to show you about that as well. And of course, Tyrel Ventura was just here. So let's go ahead and get into it, guys. Let's get into it. And put up my thing here. All right, let's talk about this event that happened with Aaron Mate and Max Blumenthal. So there was a conference called Collision. It was in Toronto. This conference took place in June, but the video just became available on the Gray Zone's channel. So that's how I found out about this discussion that they had. This conference was actually pretty cool. I want to show you some of the people who were there. Now, this was a conference more so for tech, but it wasn't just tech people that were there. So here are some of the speakers. Here we have Lupita. She's an actress. I'm not sure if you guys are familiar with her. Blockchain was there. So really like high profile people. The co-founder and CEO of Substack was there. I'm just going to point out a couple of them, not name everybody. Carmelo Anthony, NBA star, was there. Let's go on further down. And there's more that you can click as well. Editor for Wired was there. Let me click down further. There's a lot of people. And that's what I liked about it, because it was a chance for them to get their message out to a lot of people without having to worry about, we can't say this because of YouTube. We can't say that because of the censorship. This was an in-person conference, so they got to hear their message. But you get the idea, the people who were there at this conference, and the list goes on and on. I'll actually go ahead and put the link to this in the chat, so you guys can check it out for yourself. But that was Collision Conference for 2022. I believe they've already started posting about the 2023 conference. But so for their segment, which was June 22nd, but like I said, this just appeared on their channel. Their segment was called 50 Shades of Truth. The question of what precisely constitutes news and fact-based reporting has never been more subject to debate and disagreement. Can we trust the mainstream media, or does it serve an interest at odds with the public good? Where do we draw the line between fact and fringe? Join Max Blumenthal and Aaron Mate, editor-in-chief of and reporter at the Gray Zone, respectively, as they strive to answer these questions. So here they are listed as the speakers. And Martina here, she's actually the one that's asking them the questions. So I can go ahead and skip and jump over to that clip. Give me just a second. All right. Let's go ahead and bring that up. So again, as I said, this conference took place in person. So I thought that was really cool. I don't see that much of that happening anymore. Where's my quality? Okay, yeah. There used to be, now I can't get off of this. Get me out of here. Okay. There used to be more in-person conferences. Like at one point, they used to do this thing called Politicon. I'm not sure if you guys remember that, but I haven't heard about Politicon, honestly, since the pandemic happened, to be honest. So I don't know if those things are still going on or not, but we need to be doing more things like this, these in-person conference appearances where we can talk to people in person. And I think they also were able to take questions from the audience as well. But there's a certain part here that I do want to highlight. So let's go ahead and get into that.
Right? Tell me about how that came about.
Just recently at the Gray Zone, we obtained some leaks from a British journalist named Paul Mason who...
Oh, wait a minute. That's not the starting point. I think I put the wrong part there. It's when Max is talking. Sorry, guys. Okay, this part.
Our friend traditionally did is to expose the deceptions that are taking us into these disastrous wars, which are now wrecking our economy and possibly imperiling all.
Wait a minute, that's not it either. Maybe that is it.
Your startups. It's something that the mainstream media now, echoing Joe Biden as his little band of stenographers, is calling the Putin price hike. And for doing the kind of reporting we do, no one debates us. They don't challenge us on the facts. What they do.
Let's pause that part right there. So he's talking about here how when it comes to the reporting that they do, instead of people trying to debate them on the issues, instead of anyone trying to write an article to, I don't know, debunk what they're saying, they choose to smear them instead. And it's not like the invitation hasn't been there, right? I've seen this time and time again where either Max or Aaron will invite them. Like, why don't we have this discussion? Like, invite me on to have this discussion. They won't do that. They feel more comfortable smearing them because the reality is those other journalists that do that, they don't want to hear the truth. They don't want to hear what Max and Aaron have to say. Their job is to smear them so that you won't hear what they have to say. That's what they do. But I'm going to let him go on and continue. But he's right. Like, why not have this debate with them? Why not have the open discussion instead of writing these hit pieces that I see all the time on Twitter? It's a mess.
And Aaron's going to address this, is they try to deplatform us, they try to censor us, and they claim that me and Putin made a deal to set up the Gray Zone. They also say, you know, I mean, this is the mainstream press, the one that's freaking out about disinformation. You've had a lot of panels here on disinformation. They also said that Putin paid bounties to the Taliban to kill U.S. troops. The New York Times reported that, as if the Taliban needed extra incentive to get rid of occupiers that had been there for 20 years. They said that Putin fabricated the existence of Hunter Biden's laptop, as if the Biden family couldn't be completely corrupt with business deals in China and Ukraine. They said that...
Oh, can't play this part. Hold on. But he has a point there, right? Because it can't be that Joe Biden is doing something wrong. It can't be that Joe Biden's son, Hunter Biden, may just not be legit, dude. May just not be legit. Can't be that. We have to put the focus and attention on someone else. It has to be someone else that we blame because we have to make sure that Joe Biden and his family look good regardless. And I've said this before, you have to ask yourself, if it was Trump in that situation instead of Joe Biden, what would those same media outlets be doing? CNN, MSNBC, they wouldn't run cover for Donald Trump. They would do everything that they could to smear Donald Trump. And they would even push for you like they've done before to say, okay, he needs to be impeached. But because it's their guy and because he's a Democrat and they're on his team, they're running cover for him every chance that they get. This is why it's important to listen to independent media, because we're going to give you a perspective that you're most likely are not going to get from mainstream media until it's so obvious to the rest of the public that they have to talk about it. Until then, you won't hear it. That's the problem. So I got to scoot to this part right about there.
States. I mean, Putin is being blamed now by a member of parliament in the UK named Tobias Ellwood for the British rail strikes. So what's going on here? Why is Putin being blamed for everything? It's because the role of the mainstream press, which is spreading all these lies, which is the most prolific disseminator of disinformation on the planet, is seeking to distract us from what our predator class at home is actually doing to us, to divide us and destroy our economic livelihoods. And so we exist to do something else.
These are quite hard lines. Now, talk about censorship, right?
So it was funny when she comes in there and she goes, these are quite hard lines. And I'm like, but keep in mind, guys, this message is going out to a lot of people. There are a lot of people in that audience that are hearing this message, which needs to happen more often.
Right, Erin. You must have come really under attack for exactly defending your, editorial guidelines, right? Tell me about how that came about.
Just recently at the Grey Zone, we obtained some leaks from a British journalist named Paul Mason, who claims to
about a British journalist.
About a British.
Yeah.
Right. But these emails came from the emails of Paul Mason. He was sending them. And basically, he was plotting with some colleagues and some contacts inside the British national security state to have us deplatformed. And there's a long conversation about it, and I can't go into details, but basically, nowhere in these exchanges does it occur to them, if we don't agree with the Grey Zone, why don't we just write an article debunking them? They've put out a bunch of reporting. We cover all sorts of topics, Russia, Syria, Ukraine, China. Put out an article refuting us based on facts. That's what intellectually honest people do.
These emails.
And see, the reason why they don't do that is because they're not interested in having that debate. They're not interested in having that discussion. They're not interested in, picking apart parts of their article and pointing out, hey, well, this is incorrect because, this information is missing, or I need to add this part, or let me tell you what they didn't say about that, because they know 9 times out of 10, the things that they're saying is true. And number two, they don't want to have that discussion. They don't want to put out that article because, again, their job is not to do that. Their job is to smear anyone who is coming out against the mainstream narrative. Now, I look back to something many years ago. My mom, she used to watch this talk show host named Phil Donahue. Don't hear much from Phil today, but back then, this was a big show. And my mom used to watch it. And I remember my mom talking about them taking Phil down because Phil Donahue did not agree with the war in Iraq. And he was vocal about that. Next thing I knew, Phil was gone. They don't just do it to journalists. They don't just do it to people who have YouTube shows, Rumble shows, Rockfin, whatever you want to call it today. It's not just those people. Anyone who has a platform, they will go after. So Phil Donahue was on mainstream television, not even cable. He was on network television. So he was reaching a lot of people. So the producer said, oh no, we cannot have that narrative coming through. Not up in here. So they got rid of him just like that. We've seen it happen time and time again. I still remember, and some of you may be a little bit too young to remember this. I remember when Ellen DeGeneres, and now I know there's some things out about her now, but I remember when Ellen DeGeneres had her own sitcom and she came out on the sitcom. Her character did, even though she was also coming out herself in real life, right? They took Ellen down. The network said, nope, you have got to go. Just like that. So it's the narrative that they want at that time and what works for that narrative and what works for them. anything going against the narrative that they want you to hear, they're going to come after. They're going to try to pull those people down. Now, is it a big deal for someone to do that today? Is it a big deal for someone to speak against the war in Iraq today? No. Is it a big deal for someone to come out on network television today? No. But at that time, it was. That was not the narrative that they wanted you to hear. So just something to keep in mind.
Expose a prominent British journalist working with someone in the UK Foreign Office who is an intelligence officer, Andy Price, to get us removed from all social media platforms and removed from PayPal as other alternative media outlets like Mint Press and Consortium News were, simply because he doesn't like our opinions on the NATO proxy war in Ukraine. That's where we're at right now.
Guys, gray zone basically means standing between black and white. Would you really stand between different sides, or are you basically always taking the counter side? It seems to me like you're, against all mainstream media and just, for everything else.
We have our political views. I mean, I personally identify with the left, I always have, but the facts are the facts. And journalism was once considered a trade where the facts come first. Mm-hmm. But in this environment where essentially our journalism is controlled by the same people who control our society.
So are you only fact-based, or are you opinionated and do you write commentaries and all that?
We have our opinions, but the facts always come first. Mm-hmm. And what
Okay, so that answers that question, because this is the thing that some people think about independent media. They think it's just all opinionated. That's not necessarily true. So Aaron just let you know, they have the facts come first. And yes, also they'll add their opinion, but the facts always come first. So that answers that question. Because some people, they just hear independent media and they're just like, oh, well, that's disinformation because it's just your opinion. It's not actual journalism. That's not true. I mean, yeah, are there some people that just give their opinion and they don't, report on like the facts? Yeah, but obviously that's not what they're doing. Aaron Mate was in Syria. Like, they traveled to these places. It's not like they just wake up one day and say, okay, let me tell you my opinion about this and don't do any research on it. Come on.
Makes us stand out, I think, is that so many of our colleagues, unfortunately, have abandoned that tradition of not putting the facts first. And look, the most hilarious example to me was when for 4 years it was fashionable in the US to believe that the president of the US was a Russian asset and was being compromised with P-tapes and other forms of blackmail. It was transparently ridiculous, it was a scam, but everybody went along with it. Not because I think they actually believed it, but because that was the dominant partisan narrative of that time, and we're above that.
I guess it's fair to say that most people here also in the audience and myself don't trust all the mainstream media because we have so many different platforms right now, social media, we get a lot of sources, sometimes it's of course an overflow of news as well, so it's really important that we select wisely and we make our judgment afterwards. But would you say that the trust in the mainstream media will decline further from here, or has it reached the lowest point already?
Hopefully it will. People need to see that the mainstream media has functioned as a mighty Wurlitzer for the policymakers that are engaged in a controlled demolition of our economy. A new survey reported by the Quincy Institute in Washington shows that US media reported more on Ukraine, all with one voice, one message, one line, which was completely identical to the line of the Defense Department and the State Department, which is also the line of the Canadian government.
Yeah, they repeat the same talking points for those who are not aware. In fact, I think Jackson Hinkle, he showed this on like his Rumble stream. You can look this up for yourself, by the way. You can actually look up like what the State Department says. It's not private information. You can look that up. I recommend that you read that. You can do this every week because their statement changes, right? And then go watch mainstream media. I guarantee you'll hear the same narrative. Guarantee.
More than it ever reported in any month on the U.S. assault on Iraq and Afghanistan. And so it's the mainstream media that's been driving what Congress now acknowledges is a NATO proxy war in Ukraine. And what has it led to? It has led to hyperinflation through the sanctioning of one of the world's largest exporters of oil. It has led to record gas prices. It's led to economic ruin on the horizon, a global recession, famine in the global south. And the media was telling you that Ukraine was going to win, the Russian economy would be ruined, these sanctions were just, and everything's going to be fine. And the public is not on board anymore. Maybe this is a bubble, and you don't feel that here, but go outside and talk to regular people, the people who were ignored and demonized by the Canadian media, like the people who were protesting in Ottawa, who had their bank accounts seized, who were called hate mongers and white supremacists. Those people are not going to be happy.
There's so many reasons why the public.
Let's talk about that for a second in reference to who mainstream media tends to talk to. This is something that I noticed even when I was interning when it comes to the media. A lot of times they're not talking to working class people. They're not talking to poor people. And I'm not talking about when they go out there to get an interview from someone when they want to make them look like the village idiot. I'm not talking about that. A local news does that a lot, by the way. I'm talking about when they actually want to get an opinion, when they want to hear about someone's experience. Most of the time, they're talking to people who are either an expert in that field or they're talking to people who honestly, they're of a different class. I want to see people of mainstream media go interview people in Appalachia. Working class and poor people in Appalachia. I want to see people, CNN, MSNBC, Fox News. I want to go see them talk to people who are living in working class communities here in Boston. I want to see them go to Roxbury. I want to see them go to Mattapan. I want to see them go to Dorchester. I want to see them go to those communities and talk to people, not just the people who are around Beacon Hill and Back Bay. You don't see them do it. This is why you can have someone, or thankfully, you have someone like Eleanor Goldfield who will create a documentary about those experiences. Because Eleanor Goldfield did that. She went to Appalachia and she created a documentary talking to working class and poor people who actually grew up there and talked about their own experiences. So if it wasn't for some of these documentary filmmakers, if it wasn't for independent journalists, if it wasn't for independent commentators, you wouldn't hear their stories because mainstream media doesn't want you to hear what they have to say. They'd rather bring in an expert who's like, I don't know, upper middle class or wealthy. They'd rather bring them in and let that expert tell you about the experiences of those who are poor and who are working class than them actually going and talking to those communities for themselves, because they don't really want you to hear what it's really like. That's the problem. So that's that. Let's go back in.
Public has lost confidence in the media. I mean, we all remember Iraq WMDs. Even in the run-up to the 2020 election, some anonymous intelligence officials decided to say that Hunter Biden's laptop was just Russian disinformation. And that was enough for pretty much every single media outlet, with a few exceptions, to say, okay, we're not going to cover it. And then now we have to acknowledge, oh yeah, right, we were wrong about that. Mm-hmm. But there's so many examples of this, and so when it happens enough times, no wonder people are losing trust. You know, and by the way, there are stories that the media won't even cover that we cover, like the OPCW cover-up scandal, which is a story about an alleged chemical attack in Syria, and then you had the world's top chemical weapons watchdog go and investigate it. Their own investigators found no evidence of that, but they were censored. We've gotten leaks from that investigation, and we report on it. The rest of the media won't even acknowledge the existence of these whistleblowers. And so when you have enforced censorship like that from the media outlets themselves, people are going to lose trust and go to alternative sources.
I remember when...
Right. And I noticed too, like, even after he mentioned that part, that like people are going to lose trust and they're going to go to alternative sources. You know, this happens, but it's like, that's not what obviously the powers that be want you to do, right? So what do? They try to shut down those alternative sources that people are turning to. That's why they're going after people like, again, whether you like what he has to say or not. That's why they went after Jackson Hinkle. That's why they went after Lee Camp. This is why they're going after them. They don't want you to hear what they have to say. This is why the algorithm has changed to the sense that they push mainstream media and they suppress independent media. It wasn't always that way.
Al Jazeera launched in Qatar. One of their main mottos and goals was Al-Rai wal-Rai al-Akhar. You understand probably. One opinion and the other opinion. It's always important, of course, to show all sides of the story. But to me, it seems that your work is activist journalism, right? You don't want to just show the second side of the story. So what is your ultimate goal, Max?
All the mainstream media are activist journalists. They are activists for neoliberal capitalism and for the political establishment. That's why they spend hours and hours on January 6th instead of doing hours and hours of reporting in the trenches in Appalachia of people who are dying of opioid deaths and being flooded with this poison. There are so many issues they could be talking about. Why are they talking about January 6th constantly? It's because they are activists for their cause. And we
That's right. See, that's what I was telling you. That's right. They don't want to hear what those other voices have to say. They don't want people to see the reality of what's going on with people who are poor and people who are working class in this country. There used to be a show. I don't know if it's still on MTV. You have to tell me. There was a show on MTV a while back and it was called True Life. And they had different stories each time. Like one could be true life. I'm getting married to a stranger. There was one episode and it was true life living on minimum wage in the United States. And they followed, I think it was 3 to 4 individuals. They followed them around every day, just seeing their everyday daily routine of what they have to go through making minimum wage in the United States. And they were living off a minimum wage or trying to. And it was really like, I think it was really disheartening to see watching people just try to take as many jobs as they could. There was one girl, she had like 2 or 3 jobs at one point just to make enough money. That was just to pay rent. They don't really want you to see that. They don't really, you got to go, like I told you, you had to go to MTV True Life to see that stuff. I don't even know if MTV talks about that stuff anymore. But there's a reason why you see reality shows about the rich, but you don't see reality shows about the poor. I told you guys this before. Instead of Keeping Up with the Kardashians, I want to see a show called Keeping Up with the Rent, of what it's like for poor people in this country, what it's like for working class people in this country. Why isn't anybody trying to offer them a reality TV show?
We are transparent about what we believe, so you can trust that we have these beliefs. And why are we, for that reason, we're accused of disinformation. There was actually a speaker yesterday from a group called the Institute for Strategic Dialogue, funded by the UK and US governments, that has published a paper accusing Aaron of being one of the most prolific spreaders of disinformation on the globe on the issue of Syria, but they never pointed out one piece of disinformation. They've refused our request for an interview.
But just that claim itself is enough for an outlet like The Guardian, a mainstream outlet, to then repeat that study, to do an article about it, and repeat the claim that I spread disinformation without identifying a single case where I actually allegedly spread disinformation.
Right. So,
and yeah, I just want to add here too. Remember, The Guardian is Robert Reich. Remember that.
Aaron, are you getting death threats? Have you come under attack, physical, verbal attacks?
No. I mean, I'm fortunate not to have faced, for example, what Julian Assange is facing right now, where he's being caged and tortured because he is really the foremost person in the world of exposing Western state crimes. And he's actually a great example of what we're talking about. When you really do your job as a journalist, when you educate humanity about the inhumanity of our rulers, they are going to pour down on you all the inhumanity that they have. And that's why he's now stuck in a prison and facing possible extradition to the US.
And let's be clear, WikiLeaks has never published anything false. They've never published a false document, and that's why he's jailed. That's why the Biden administration is seeking to extradite him. That's why.
See, I can't play too much of this because YouTube don't like that, but that's the part I want you to really like take in is like, he's there for a reason. It's not because he was saying something that wasn't true. It's because he was saying something that is true and they don't want people to know about it. That's why he's there. Gonna fast forward to just this part really quick. I can't play the whole video, but here we go.
feeds them, which is the intelligence services that are seeking to kill him.
And of course, we also have to talk about business and the background of your operation. So I think the audience would love to know also how are you funded and how you select the stories and who
She shut that conversation down really quick, huh?
your audience is. Can you talk to me about that?
Well, we're funded by hundreds and hundreds of people just like you through Patreon. We're still on PayPal somehow. I don't know how long that will last. And we bring in revenue through my Rockfin show, through our live streams, and anyone who might donate a little more, which is not a lot. It's basically enough for us to barely continue this 3-person operation. Our people,
Three people?
Yeah, we have 3 people, and I pay contributors small fees for articles. Anyone else is a friend of mine in the U.S. who people I met through the Palestine Solidarity Movement, which I participated in as a reporter for many years, which helped me get kicked out of the media.
Let me ask you, Aaron, what is the future for fact-based reporting? Do you think we will have more political interference, less freedom of speech? What do you tell, especially the next generation of journalists, if there still are?
Well, on the future, I mean, I think so much rides on the case of Julian Assange. If the U.S. succeeds in extraditing him and imprisoning him and killing him, as I think they want to do, then I think that's the end of fact-based journalism. Because look,
And I'm going to end it there because, like I said, I can't play too much of that on here. But they hit the nail on the head, right? I mean, this is why someone like Julian Assange is it's so significant. Like, I don't think people understand. If they can do that to him, if they can just decide, like, we're going to silence you guys. We don't like what you're saying, so we're going to shut you up one way or another. That affects all independent media, not just left independent media. But I think, you guys, if you want to see the full discussion, it's on the Gray Zones channel. So definitely check that out. Was there a link? Oh, I'll put the link in the chat. So you can see the full discussion. I guess I should have put a name there, huh? Well, you guys see it. It's the only YouTube one. Okay. Yeah. I mean, we have to have these conversations, right? So first of all, shout out to Collision at Toronto for even letting them come on to have that discussion. Because like I said, like they said this to people in the audience who some of them are from mainstream media, right? Some of them are tech like CEOs. And so they needed to hear that message. Now, that doesn't mean that they're necessarily going to make a change here for us, but they needed to hear that message. So shout out and kudos to Collision in Toronto. I think that was awesome. Stephen R says the entire media covered up for that laptop, right? You know who talked about it? I did. Mainly independent media. Shout out to Debs Mo for that super sticker. Thank you so much. Delthea says Max B wrote a book called Republican Gomorrah and media personalities loved him. He turned that same lens on Dens and big business, and now he's lunatic and shouldn't be heard. Hashtag MSM, hashtag lies and smears. That's right. Thank you for pointing that out, Delthea. Shout out to Ski for the super chat. We need our own platform, Sabby. I agree. Angela says Aaron and Max are tag teaming. The only thing that would make this better is an announcer saying, and in comes Chris Hedges with the steel chair. Yeah, that would be awesome, huh? That is cool. Rockfin. Thank you so much for this. Roger Meadows on Rockfin. They are told you, Sabby, thirds don't pull as much from Dems as much as they bring never and infrequent voters out to vote. So like he said, thirds are not spoilers. Oh, okay. Gotcha. Good point. Thank you so much for that, Roger. Okay. All right. We're going to go into our final story tonight. Now, this one is about Professor Richard Wolff. He's given us another economic update, but this time with a little bit more of a historical perspective here. Let me go ahead and bring him up on the screen. Now, this was done with RJ Esco. He's met with him before on his show called The 0 Hour. And there's something he does here that I really, really like. He makes the comparison between where we are economically right now and where we were economically in this country in the 1970s. And I also have a graph. I have some numbers I'm going to show you that I think may shock you when you see just how bad things are economically in this country today. So let's go ahead and get into that.
1980, you could actually go back into the 1970s and you would see a number that most commentators have been struggling with now for the following reason. We're talking half a century. From 1972 to now is 1/2 of a century. Basically, across that century, the real wages, that is the amount of money we give to an average worker, adjusted for what he or she has to pay when they spend that money on food, clothing, shelter, and so on. In other words, to understand the wage as the money and the affordability of the money you get, what you can buy with it, there's been no change. We have flatlined the American working class. And the important thing about that is that for the previous 100 to 150 years, that was not the case. This country raised the real wage. That is, whatever happened to prices, wages went up more than.
Notice he said this country raised the real wage. That's what used to happen. When is the last time we increased the minimum wage in this country? Minimum wage is what? Still $7.25 an hour? Just something to think about.
That so that worker could afford more. That's why we have in America things like the American dream or the notion of American exceptionalism. For 100, 150 years, capitalism in America gave more real income to the bulk of its working class. Not, of course, to African Americans, not particularly to women, but overwhelmingly to the white male population. It was a rising standard of living.
And that changed. And I like the fact that Professor Wolff was sure to include, not necessarily to African Americans, not necessarily for women's, but for the white male working class. This country, at one point, it used to actually raise the wage the way that it was supposed to be raised. That way they could afford products. That way they could afford, like when prices increases, the wages went up to help them along the way. That is not happening today. And I don't mean just for inflation for 2022. That wasn't happening last year. That wasn't happening in 2020. That wasn't happening in 2019, 2018, 2017. That hasn't been happening for a long time. And here we are today. So you have a group of people, working class people, and let's also say people who are poor too. You have a group of people that for the past 10, actually, I think he said 50 years. I'm gonna show you the chart in a second. It's actually 50 years. For the past 50 years, the wages never caught up. This is why we tell people even that $15 ask for minimum wage, that's actually still less than it should be when you account for inflation throughout the years. So people are trying to play catch up, and now we have these increased gas prices. I know they're starting to go down a little bit, but not enough for me. Increased gas prices. The grocery store prices are heavily increased. God, good luck trying to buy meat at the grocery store right now. Like I said, if you want to become a vegetarian, now is a good time. But Now you have people who were already underpaid to begin with, then the price is increased. Your wages are still not increasing. So people are just trying to catch up. We're just barely keeping your head above water. That's what's happening right now. So a lot of people are saying it's because of the pandemic. Well, no. Most of the people that I talk to who are struggling financially right now were already struggling financially before the pandemic even happened. The pandemic just made it worse. And now you have inflation.
That stopped in the early 1970s, and here comes the important point. It never resumed. In other words, it bounced around a little, as that Bureau of Labor Statistics graph will show you, but the long-term 50 years, nothing. Now, during those 50 years, the productivity of American workers went up every year, 1 to 2%. But, you know, over 50 years, we're then talking doubling, tripling, an enormous increase. Why do I tell you that? Because productivity measures, in effect, what the worker gives to the employer, just like the real wage measures what the employer gives to the worker.
So the productivity over the past 50 years has increased, meaning we've been giving more to the employer. But when it comes to the real wage, the employer has been giving less to us. This is what's been happening. So you're going into work, you may be working longer hours. I went through all this. You might be working longer hours, but it's still not really paying off financially because the employer has not increased the real wage. So who's benefiting in this situation that we've had for the past 50 years? It's been the employers, not the employees, unless you have like a government job. But other than that, the employer is the one who's been benefiting. So I want to say this again for people who are just coming in. Just because the productivity increased, that does not mean the real wage increased. And productivity increase doesn't necessarily mean it's a good thing for the employee. That's a good thing for the employer. Basically, employers have been exploiting our labor, but more so over the past 50 years. So again, this is not something that started with the pandemic.
If what the employer gave to the worker is flat for 50 years, as we've just discussed it was, and as the data all show, but if what the worker gives the employer goes up steadily for 50 years, guess what? We become a vastly more unequal society because the rich who own the businesses, either directly or by buying shares of stock, they're picking up the growing gap between what the employer gives the worker and the growing output that the worker gives the employer. So there's your explanation for the inequality that is off the chart. You know, 50 years ago, the United States was less unequal than, say, Britain or France or Italy and so on. Now we are much more unequal than those societies. All of that is wrapped up in these statistics. And the people who sit on top, the big businessmen and women, the politicians, they own and buy. We could talk about Uber last week, a stunningly wonderful example of all of that. Republicans and Democrats alike have been presiding for 50 years over this process.
The politicians are complicit as well. The politicians have been residing over this structure for the past 50 years. There's something I want to mention to you that I've been thinking about for a while. You notice you hear a lot of talking points on mainstream media, and I saw this on the political arena debate stages as well. You hear a lot of the politicians say we have to look at the middle class. The middle class is shrinking. But you never hear them frame it in this way, which is the working class and the poor is increasing. because that's really what's happening. They don't want to say that because that's not as sexy, right? That's not as attractive. That's really what's happening, though. A lot of Democrat politicians say this. The middle class is shrinking. We got to look out and protect the middle class. The middle class is shrinking because the working class and the poor are increasing. They don't tell you that part. And why is it always these politicians? Why do they always say we have to protect and look out for the working class? Excuse me, not the working class. We have to protect and look out for the middle class. Sometimes I guess they will say working class. Don't really hear them saying we have to protect and look out for the poor, though. In fact, you rarely hear them mention poor people. It's a lot of times it's middle class, sometimes working class. But when it comes to people who are poor, they're silent on that. Hit that like button, guys. That helps me with the algorithm. Got to keep those likes coming.
Hasn't made any difference. The rate of the gap growing between what is given to the wealthy by the workers and what they don't get in return has gotten wider and wider, whether or not a Republican or a Democrat was sitting in the White House or presiding in Congress. It really made no difference. So they're all culpable. And now to say, and I'm blown away, RJ, as much as you are, maybe more, to have the head of the Federal Reserve get up in his rich businessman outfit and stand there and talk about how we're going to deal with an inflation, which, by the way, is why the number is terrible these days, because workers' wages are rising at roughly half the rate of our prices, and therefore workers are falling behind. But to stand there and to say, we're going to deal with this inflation, which, by the way, reflects that the Federal Reserve hasn't been able to do its job, because its job, written in its charter, is to maintain price stability.
Uh-oh. And that was not something that I knew before I watched this episode. Did you guys hear what he just said about the Federal Reserve's responsibility to maintain price stability?
Hello, inflation means you didn't do that. Stable is not an inflation. So to stand there and to say, we're going to deal with this inflation, by the way, he's been saying that for the entire last year, and to date, no sign of it. But to say it, and he's going to raise interest rates because that will bring down demand. Whoa. Who gets hurt by an inflation? Who gets hurt when you raise the price of something? Who gets hurt when you raise the interest rate on borrowed money? The answer is the poor. That's all markets allocate whatever is scarce based on how much money you have. That's what
This is the part, too, that I want to mention to people as well. If you are making $7.25 an hour, federal minimum wage, if you're making that right now, and let's say where you live, gas is like $4 a gallon right now, you're not really making anything. Because depending on how far you have to drive to get back and forth to work, which has been the case for some people that I've spoken to, you're basically working to pay to put gas into your car to get back and forth from work. So what does that mean for those people? They may have to pick up a second job. Now you got to pick up a second job. Now you got to talk to your first job and let them know that you had to pick up a second job. And then you have to try to see if they're willing to work with you in reference to shifts. Maybe you may have to switch to a morning schedule with that employer and go for the evening schedule with the next employer. And not everybody is as understanding about that, by the way. I've worked 2 jobs before, so I know. So I don't know how, and I've said this before, if you have to drive to get to work, we got to remind everybody here, not everyone has public transportation. If you have to drive to get to work and you're making $7.25 an hour, how are you feeling right now? Let me know. Let me know.
Market does. It bids up the price of whatever is scarce, and then only the rich can afford it. So you're solving a problem based on 50 years of redistributing income from the bottom and the middle to the top by doing more of the same, by choosing policies that are more costly to the poor and the middle than they are to the rich. The rich person doesn't care if the price of milk doubles. It makes no difference. But for a poor or middle income family with children, it makes a big difference. What are you doing acting as though we were all in the boat together and we're going to constrain demand by what are you talking about? You are using a language carefully edited so that no one understands the discrimination against the vast majority of the people that's going on here. When Mr. Powell talks,
I just want to interrupt here for a second and echo what he said about the rich, how they're not penalized. They're not affected. They're really not. People who are rich, they're not affected by the fact of if milk goes up, if gas goes up, they're not affected like a lot of us are. It doesn't hurt them the way it would hurt us. It doesn't hurt them the way that it would hurt someone who's making $7.25 an hour. Because I'm still trying to figure out how those people are affording groceries right now and gas. And for the people who want to chime in and say, oh, well, they should just get on food stamps. It's not that easy. It's not that easy. When I was struggling, I know I didn't fit the criteria to even get any type of assistance from the government. I had just missed that window. So I couldn't get any type of food stamps or anything like that. And there's a lot of people in that situation where they fall right in that financial window where they miss it just by this much. So they're still having to pay those full prices for groceries. I don't know what they're doing. I don't know how they're doing it. God forbid if they have like a baby and they have to buy diapers or if they have to buy formula. Not everyone can breastfeed. God forbid.
He is disrespecting, he is hurting, he is discriminating against the working class majority. It's as if he got up there and announced an interesting new social program. However, unfortunately, this will not be available to Black people or brown people or female people. We would sit there staring at the sheer gall of an official talking like that. But here we have the same thing, but we have a mainstream media that nods along as if there was something reasonable, normal, routine. It isn't. It is the very thing that is splitting and ripping this society apart is being enacted by people who do not figure it out, or they don't care, or in my experience, they don't figure it out because they don't care. And then the two sides reinforce each other and they become the Bidens, the Trumps, the Powells of our society.
And there you have it. And I know you guys didn't get to hear RJ, but honestly, that's really the part you really need to hear is this. I'm sorry, but yeah, if you want to see this full interview, this is on RJ Esco's show. It's called The 0 Hour. And the name of this segment is Richard Wolff on the banality of evil economics. So definitely check it out if you want to watch the whole thing. It's about 35 minutes long. But I want to show you some numbers in reference to what Professor Wolff was saying. I do want to go ahead and get into a couple of graphs here because I want you to see what he's actually talking about. So, let me click on it. Okay, let's take a look at this, ladies and gentlemen. Now, this is what Richard Wolff is referring to. I don't know about you guys, but I do like to see graphs. I do like to see, we're going to be talking about numbers and dollars and cents here. I do like to see some type of a graph. So let's go ahead and show you what is happening and what he's referring to. I'm going to show you what the dollar was worth in 1970, what it's worth today, and you're going to see this whole productivity piece that he was talking about as well. So it says here, $100, let me make this a little bit bigger. Okay, that's good. $100 in 1970 is worth $763.69 today. That's not a lot. 1970, $763.69 today. The US dollar has lost 87% of its value since 1970. 87%. That's terrible. Let's go on. $100 in 1970 is equivalent in purchasing power to about $763.69 today, an increase of $663.69 over 52 years. The dollar had an average inflation rate of 3.99% per year between 1970 and today, producing a cumulative price increase of 663.69%. Let me make this a little bit larger. I'm sorry. Thought it was bigger for you guys. People in the back. This means that today's prices are 7.64 times higher than average prices since 1970. And now this is according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics Consumer Price Index. A dollar today only buys 13.094% of what it could buy back then. Guys, take notes on this. Homework lesson for tonight. Take notes on this. A dollar today only buys 13.094% of what it could in 1970. Not even 40%, not even 50%, 13%. This is a problem. This is why I keep telling people I've seen these numbers before. By the way, you can go to this site oftentimes every day and you'll see different rates. Like you can go to this site as many times as possible. It adjusts daily. So the problem that we have here is that economically, we're in trouble. I feel you, Hella Cook. This shit's not right. I feel you. You're right. But there's more. The inflation rate in 1970 was 5.72%. The current inflation rate compared to last year is now 9.06%. If this number holds, $100 today will be equivalent in buying power to $109.06 next year. The current inflation rate page gives more detail on the latest inflation rates. So I want to go down here because I do want to show you those graphs. Now, I hope when it didn't, okay. Great. All right, there's the buying power one, and then there's this one. All right, let's look at both of these graphs. Here's the graph that shows the buying power of $100 in 1970. So it's going to show you here. Let me show you my So at the bottom of the graph, you can see all the years here, and it goes all the way to 2022. So here we go. 1970, $100. I like how it marks it like that. Notice this is adjusted for inflation. So let's follow this all the way up. See how it just continues to increase, right? Follow this all the way up. Whoopsie. Right here to 2022, 763.69, right? That number checks out. Now, let's look at the second chart. When 100 is equivalent to 763.69 over time, that means that the real value of a single US dollar decreases over time. In other words, a dollar will pay for fewer items at the store. So you guys see, that's the thing. Because if you just look at this graph, it's like, oh, okay, it's been increasing. That's a good thing. No. And I'll show you the second graph that shows you why. Buying power of $100 over time. Now, this is from 1970 to 2022. Here's that same $100 over here at the top. And you'll see all of the years at the bottom. If you notice, it continued to go down. Even when we get to, let's go to 1990, 91 on here. 1991, $26.95, right? Do you see how quickly the value fell? $100, 1970. It just steadily, boom, boom. Okay, and then we enter here, 1980s. Okay, now we're entering into Reaganomics, which we know it did not trickle down. And then we go all the way over to, excuse me, I don't want to skip over the housing crisis. Pardon me there. Then we get into 2008. Okay, housing crisis. And that was at 17.11. And now we come all the way over to 2022, sorry. 12.42. Do you see the problem? This is terrible. So this is what it's worth now. Like this dollar is worth nothing compared to what it was worth back then. And to add on top of it, you have inflation right now. There's more to this chart too. Like it goes on and shows you different graphs as well. It's really the value of a dollar in the United States has decreased over the years. I can put this in the chat if you guys want to look at this on your own time as well. Let me go ahead and, I think this is a long link, but I'll put it here too. That's right, George. You're right. The only problem with this graph is scale. It looks like it's flattening out, but it's really accelerating. So this is exactly what Richard Wolff was talking about. Now you can also see inflation by city here as well. There's San Francisco, there's Seattle, Boston. Of course, I knew we were going to be up here. So yeah, not every city is on here, obviously, but they list some of them. And they even talk about inflation by country and so on and so on. But what this means all in all is that the value of the US dollar significantly decreased. For us to only have 13%, to be able to get 13% buying power, show this to as many people, at least that site, if you can. I'm not saying they have to watch the stream, but if you please show them at least that site, because I want people to see when people make that argument that people just need to pull themselves up by the bootstraps. This is the problem. And don't forget housing. Let's not forget that piece of the equation. How much does housing cost now? So it's a problem. It's a problem. Gonna get these comments here on Rockfin. Thanks so much for this tip on Rockfin, Roger. Hell no, Sabby. After everything that has happened since the pandemic, there's no way they are going to bring back Politicon. With all the same YouTube players who showed up for years, plus newbies in one place after the collapse of Bernie's campaign, forced the vote, the jab, dirt, and shots been thrown in all directions. I don't think we need to see a Royal Rumble style event up there looking like 2000 Source Awards. Cornel West, who everyone, let's see, respects in the middle, holding up a Bible saying, my brother, my sister, we must show love to one another. We can't do this. And all you content creators completely ignoring him and going on. Sab and Nomiki tussling in the corner while Fiorella and Anna drop kicking each other. What? Jimmy and Jink doing Brazilian jiu-jitsu. Ron and David Dole doing ninjutsu on each other. Nico and Tim having arm wrestling contest. Professor Wolff. Oh, sorry. I guarantee you that would be the only time MSN will cover indie media creators. No, leave Politicon to the dustbin of time. Okay. Professor Richard Wolff, economic update today. You will see on the second half of his show, he was interviewing a socialist from Sweden, and she was telling how before Thatcher and Reagan, they were on a socialist path. But once the 80s hit, they started going in a neo-lib direction and wanting to privatize the social safety net. So they made the same mistake of not abolishing corporations when they had them on the ropes. That's interesting. I'll check that out, Roger. And now the Swedes are beginning to see the effects of it. So she said, when you're a socialist in the US, say you want to be like us. And you say you want to be like us, point to another country, not ours, because now we are trying to be like you. Like I said, if you don't kill the corporations once and for all when they are weak, then eventually they'll come back with a vengeance. It usually takes about 40 years to turn the boat around, and Sweden is due to abolish corporations and replace with worker co-ops. This was a year after Nixon took us off the gold standard and tied our currency value to the petrodollar and put us in the mess we're in now. Maybe we should go back to a coin standard, but tied to a platinum or a palladium coin standard. Hey, Sab, maybe you can ask Professor Wolff if this would reverse if we did that. Good question. Good question. Thank you so much for that, Roger Meadows. So yeah, guys, definitely share that article with people, or not article, but that link, because I want more people to see that. But yeah, I think I have two over here. Thank you for the super chat, AJF. FFS. I don't know. I'm terrible with abbreviations. All the hip kids are using these days. But FFS, people, you got to notice how insidiously wicked our upper class and governing class are. Damn. Diversify your news online only, folks. Good point. And Delthea, the fact that we have a class of people we euphemistically call the working poor just about says all that needs to be said about the last 50 years of economic history. It's a good point. We shouldn't even have poor people in this country. Let me rephrase that. Someone may take that the wrong way. We shouldn't have poverty in this country. We shouldn't. FFS equals, oh, for fuck's sake. Okay, thanks, Eric. I told you guys, I don't know. I'm terrible with these like acronyms and abbreviations and all that kind of stuff. All right, guys, that is the show for tonight. Come back tomorrow. Should be a good time. I'll be back 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. So let's get to it, guys. Other than that, guys, I did finally enjoy my birthday present. Some of you may have seen this in the community portion of my YouTube page. I did get concert tickets for my birthday for March, and the concert was Saturday. So I got to see it was the mixtape tour. So it was Salt and Pepper, In Vogue, who really still sounds really good, by the way. Like In Vogue still sounds really good. There's 3 of them now. There's not 4. 2 of the women left, and they replaced 2 of them with 1 person. So one of them is new and the other 2 are the original, but they still sound really good. And Rick Astley was there too. That was really interesting. You know, the Never Gonna Give You Up guy and New Kids on the Block. And it was fun. It was actually felt like you were listening to a mixtape because they just kept mixing like back and forth. Like it was fun. It was nice to go back. I told you guys I like older music. But yeah, that's right, Super Patriot. Salt and Pepper's here. Sabs, push it. Push it. When I hear that beat, that Sabs, push it. All right, guys, I'm out of here. You guys know how we do this. Have a good night. Keep up the fight.